Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. Today, we have an extremely special guest, Mr. Shrinidhi Mahishi. I met him as a teacher when I went to Sayadri, which is a school in Pune, in India, and I had a lovely time getting to understand his vision of education and even see the way he teaches. And so I'm really excited to interview him today. How are you doing?
Yeah, all good here. It's the first day of February. So usually in India, first day of February is when the new budget comes, the government budget. So the news is filled with that. But yeah, I'm not too sure what's happening there. But yeah, it's a new day, new month.
Does any of the government budget affect your day-to-day at Sayadri, or it's not, because it's not funded at all by the government, right?
No, not so much.
Nice.
Day to day, it does not affect.
So the first thing I want to do is, because when I think about these schools and places, I have such a vivid imagery in my mind that helps me give context to this amazing school. I feel like I really want to be able to do that to the best of the ability for the listeners. So if you have to describe the area itself in which Sayadri is located in the mountains, like, I mean, how would you go about describing that area?
You mean like the physical
Yeah, the
space?
physical space, because it is beautiful.
Yeah. So So Sayadri is a part of what is called the Krishnamurti Foundation, and there are six such schools in India, and this is the one in the western part of the country, and it's around a 2 hours drive from the city of Pune, which is also quite rich culturally, ecologically, and so on. And this is a part of what is referred to as the Western Ghats of India. So India has a stretch which goes from southern Gujarat all the way to Kerala, which is referred to as Western Ghats, and it is one of the biodiversity hotspots of the world. So this place is really rich in biodiversity. When you have come here, you might have seen how many different kinds of trees, uh, birds, and other species are around, insects. So biodiversity is something which is a very core and essential element of this part of the country. And it's very close to a wildlife sanctuary called the Bhima Shankar Wildlife Sanctuary, from where the river Bhima originates, which eventually goes and joins the river Krishna and then to the Bay of Bengal. So, yeah, it's a beautiful campus on top of a hill overlooking the Bhima River, filled with a lot of trees, sometimes snakes, even occasionally leopards. So, leopards are quite common in this area, and they are often sighted on the CCTV cameras in our school. But they are quite shy creatures, so they tend to stay away from humans. But yeah, they are very much there, quite
Yeah.
close.
And it's in the campus is covers many acres, and so even as you walk through the entire campus, you're walking through nature and trees, and there are a lot of pathways that
Yes,
feel as if you're actually on a hike.
yes, totally. And even close by, near to our campus, there are many such small hills, which are often used as hiking spots on weekends by us, by students, and so on.
And to get to this place, you have to drive up the mountain for a while, and you're pretty far from anybody else who's not part of this school.
Yeah, the closest city is Pune, which is 70 kilometers. It's far from the city, but it technically comes under the Pune district.
Hmm.
But yeah, any nearby, the nearest bank, my account is with a bank called HDFC Bank. The nearest bank is 25 kilometers away,
Wow.
which would be crazy to someone who is living in, say, Mumbai or Delhi.
Yeah, yeah.
Just the that the nearest bank is so far away would be crazy.
No, I mean, so I mean, a quick question is: does that ever? Do you think that induces the feeling of isolation ever, either among the teachers or the students?
I think isolation can be of many kinds. The way it is typically understood, I come across this quite a lot among students and in people my age. Someone might say, uh, if I can use Hindi here, अरे इंदौर में तो कुछ नहीं है या फिर भोपाल में कुछ नहीं है. Like if you talk about a particular city and you say that it does not have anything, like the way we typically think of Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, these seem to be the happening places in India. And someone may look at another place and say that not a lot happens there or not a lot exists there. And this is something that I've often heard our students also say that this place does not have anything or that place. But when I ask, what is it that you're looking for? The answer comes that uh, suppose I say Ahmednagar. Ahmednagar is a place in Maharashtra, does not have anything. When I ask, it comes down to Starbucks, it comes down to malls, comes down to multiplexes.
Mm,
So if a place has to have something, it is generally considered that it has to have these like Starbucks or like
mm,
Naturals ice cream and so on. Uh, but I feel that although definitely this is a place where what is taken for granted in a city is not there, I feel that a lot is there which one may not find in a city like Mumbai. I feel that clean and fresh air has become a rarity in India now, in most cities. So that is something, and just being around nature is has become very difficult. Another thing is isolation. I find now to be much more prevalent in cities,
mm,
where even though there are so many people, one may get socially isolated. And one does tend to get a more of a community feeling when one is here. So as soon as I step out of my house, I know the person who lives next door,
mm.
and I talk to her every day, my neighbor. You know, I know everyone who lives on this particular path where I stay, which is not that common if I were in Mumbai, say. So yeah, in one sense, we are isolated physically, but in another sense, maybe I can talk more about this as the conversation proceeds.
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of richness in a place like this.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is a really interesting point, which is kind of the density of the connections that you have in a place. So it's like you will know almost all the students, you'll know all the, because everyone lives there, right? And so, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because in this, so for listeners, it's a boarding school in which all the teachers, many of the administrators, and all the students live on that campus. And one thing I think that's super important to establish before we move forward is so it is a KFI school, which stands for Krishnamurti, who is a education philosopher who's done some amazing work. Can you kind of go through? I mean, this is a hard question, but what are some of the core tenets of the Krishnamurti philosophy that kind of influences the school to be so different from the other schools?
Yeah. So, Krishnamurti, as you said, was an educational philosopher in the 20th century. He's no more. And this particular school where I teach, Sayadri, actually came after his death. And he spoke about a lot of things related to education, related to life, living, and he really questioned some of the most fundamental things of society, fundamental aspects of society, aspects that we tend to take for granted. Uh, if I were to talk about the educational tenet of Sayadri, I think it would be difficult for me to condense it, but three things come to my mind. I feel that my understanding is that a lot of education, be it in India or be it in other parts of the world, has three components to it. One is fear, one is competition, and one is comparison. Although competition and comparison may have a lot of overlap in them, I am beginning to feel that fear is a very core aspect of fear is a very core aspect of the education system, in the sense that fear is instilled in the kids uh, in the way the education system works. Do this or you won't get marks, or if you don't do this, then you won't get marks, or if you do this, then you will get success. Very early on in life, there is some kind of conditioning that happens. If you don't do well in your exams, you won't have a good life ahead, and so on. So I feel that fear is a very core part of the way education works. And a lot of learning is made to happen not because one wants to learn, but because there is certain fear. Like if I don't study, then I'll not pass the exam, and so on.
Mm.
A lot of other things that follow. So fear is a very essential aspect of education, according to me. And I feel this is true for most of India, must be true for other parts of the world as well. The other is comparison. Maybe I can talk a bit more about comparison. The way generally I have seen education work is mostly based on comparison, meaning if there is a particular grade, say grade 8, and there are two sections, a teacher may always say to grade 8A, look, 8B is doing so well. You should also do as well as they are doing, or the other way around. Or parents say to their children that, look, your XYZ cousin is doing these things. Why are you also not working towards that? So, comparison is a very core part of our society, and also education as well, education being a part of society, which makes a child want to study in order to do better than the other person, which is what is competition. And not because one really wants to learn.
Hmm.
I think very little learning is happening because one wants to learn. A lot of learning is happening because of fear, because of competition, because of comparison. So Krishnamurti really questioned these elements and asked this question as to whether it is possible to have an education where we don't have fear, where one learns because one enjoys learning, where we don't have comparison. So teachers here, they don't use uh, fear or comparison as a way to induce learning in the children. Although I would say that we are also a part of society. So uh, the usual element of fear and comparison, it's although not as much as it's there in other schools, I wouldn't say it's uh, totally absent. It is
Hmm.
still there.
Yeah. Thanks for that breakdown. I feel like for people who may not have, I mean, even my time just spending, with being around the education system, I feel like unless you're able to actually see it, you won't viscerally feel the differences and understand what different education systems around the world are like. I think you broke it down phenomenally. But these are problems that I think exist in different levels all over the world. I mean, I think it's a really interesting analysis of the consequences of studying for because of competition or studying because of comparison, as opposed to, while it may in the outcome look the
Yeah.
exact same as someone who's motivated by truly learning, because if the outcome is just grades, they may both do well, but the intention often changes. And what I've noticed as I've grown up is the people who are still continuing to learn after they've left school after are the people who found a reason to learn, not the people who are doing it for competition reasons. The people who are studying competitively, I think,
Correct.
have stopped, learning, trying to learn as they get older and leave those systems, which I think is the long-term impact. You may study a lot until you're 18 or 20, but then what happens to the rest of your life, right? You just stop studying completely or
Yeah.
just learning. So one thing that I really want to understand is, how did you become interested in teaching at this particular school, and how did you even come to find out about Krishnamurti?
Yeah, actually, my story is a little different in the sense that I was not aware of Krishnamurti or his philosophy before I joined the school. It was very new to me. And I had actually stayed in a sister school called Rishi Valley a few years before I had joined Sayadri for some other reason. I was doing a ecology project and I happened to be on that campus for some time. And I had gotten a sense that this is a school of a different kind. It was difficult to put words to it or understand what is going on, but I could see that if I went to the campus, students are not wearing uniforms, which in India is a standard thing. In every school, students are supposed to wear uniforms. And the way they were interacting with each other, it was quite free. So I had a sense that it is a different kind of school, but then I forgot about it. And I went to Mumbai and I was working with an NGO called Teach for India for 2 years. And towards the end of my program there with Teach for India, I was looking for different places to apply, and I just came across online Sayadri School, and it suddenly struck me, this is the same Krishnamurti Foundation where I was in Rishi Valley a few years ago. So let me just go and see what's happening here. And I was staying with my parents then in Mumbai, and I really wanted to get out of that place. So I came here, and I just loved this place when I just met the people. The interview didn't feel like an interview at all. It was just a conversation like what we are having right now, and it just felt so open that I thought that perhaps this is a place where I want to be. And this was the year 2019, and it's been almost 5 years now, and I'm here.
Time flies by. I mean, this is something I really felt when I was there. I was like, it's hard to tell how many weeks or years are flying by, because you're just in this, like, to
Yeah,
me, what it felt like was, for I was there for 8 days. I felt like I just got sucked into this universe where everything moved slowly, where you can just learn. All your basic needs are met. You have healthcare, you have food,
correct.
you have really good food, you have, sports, you have everything.
Yeah,
So all your needs are met, and you just sit there and you learn. You have the best libraries. You can, I mean, I was going to ask you this next. You have bird watching, you can learn the sitar, you can learn Hindi, English, you can learn chemistry, biology, that sometimes the teachers can go and learn. I'm assuming if you wanted to, you can, anything you're
yeah,
interested
totally,
in is pretty much
totally.
taught there.
Yeah,
And you can learn from the kids. You can play all the sports, handball, basketball, football, like it's all there. And
mhm.
so what I felt when I was there is just like, wow, even as a teacher, if I wanted to learn anything while like also working at the same time, this is the perfect place to do it. So I can totally imagine how 5 years goes by. My
Yeah,
question for you is, what is kind of the day to day like for you and from a student's perspective, just so people can kind of have a better understanding of what a day in the life in Sayadri is like?
yeah. So as you said, this is a residential school. Teachers also stay on campus, and and it can get very, very involved here. The life can get very involved, and I've found often that I wake up in the morning and I'm just trying to mentally make a note of what are the things that I have to do, who I have to meet, and like what are the different activities that are going on. And suddenly I realized that, oh my God, something or the other is happening till 8 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, it's just like the kind of things that are happening under one roof. I feel that it is quite remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, of course, I have to take my usual classes during the day. But as you said, as a teacher, as long as one is doing uh, their job requirement, which is taking classes, and so on, one has the freedom to explore uh, whatever they want to explore. This could be in any field of art, music, sports, dance. Actually, I had left reading for pleasure. I hadn't done it since I left school. And it's only after I came here that I started that habit of reading just without any goal in particular, not to pass an exam, uh, which which I realized that it's so basic, but it's something which doesn't happen so often.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me, it didn't happen. And after I joined college, I left sports. I was not playing that often. But here in the last year and a half, 2 years, I've again picked up a couple of sports, badminton, volleyball, and so on. So it's quite interesting that as an adult, one has the space to do all these things, which I feel would be quite difficult to do if I was living in a city. Uh, I had gone to Bangalore for a week or so, and finding a good place to play badminton was so difficult. And finding the kind of people who you can enjoy playing with, not in the sense that one plays to win, the competitive way of playing. Even sports, that was something quite interesting for me, is that sports and competition, they are so deeply interlinked that any game is played to win,
Mm-hmm.
and one is overjoyed when one wins and one feels dejected when one loses. But the question becomes, is it possible to de-link the two of them? And I was really surprised to see that happening. Like there is a sports fest which happens here, and it's for 2 days, and there are no trophies, medals, or anything which are handed out to the winners. So one may ask, then what is the motivation for one to do well in the sport? Uh, then I feel that if one needs an extrinsic motivation to do well, meaning if one needs to beat the other person in order to do well in sports, one needs to also think about why they're playing in the. I think there's a remarkable joy in just playing for the sake of it, and not just to win. So
Yeah.
that is something mm, which was quite new for me when I joined here, and I'm still absorbing it. But yeah, playing not necessarily just to win is something which is not as common with as I feel it should be or it could be.
Yeah, the kids there have a lot of structure from the beginning of the day. They have, classes, then they have lunchtime, then classes, then extra some free time where they probably end up, studying, playtime, like where they're just, out, and then they have dinner. So, and then they have like maybe an open day Sunday. Is Sunday the open day or both Saturday and Sunday?
It's Sunday. Saturday they have like half a day.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, in regards to competition, it was really funny because I was playing basketball with the students there, and it was the first time I'd ever played where no one was keeping track of the score. It was so odd to me. I was like, "Who's keeping track? Like, are we just going back and forth? Like, nobody's keeping score." I was so confused. And then over time, people were explaining to me the philosophy of, that they don't really do it. It was very funny to me though, because I'm so used to keeping score and even as you speak, what I'm thinking is competition in its own way is kind of like the drug, right? It's like it makes whatever you're doing more enjoyable. For me, I'm very competitive. I don't mind losing, but I love winning. And so, but when I
Mm.
think about it, what ends up happening is because of that, one benefit of that is I can enjoy doing anything once you add a little
Yeah.
competitive element to it. It doesn't matter what it is. Even if you gave me a task that I find very mundane, if you have another person do it next to me and say whoever does it slightly better wins, I'm going to really enjoy it. So in that sense, I think competition. So here's actually my big picture question. Competition, for example, I think is a really important thing a person has to learn to understand about themselves and figure out to what extent is that something they want to engage in and don't want to engage in. What I'm curious about a school like Sayadri is because it's built on another person's philosophy, you have to like tiptoe the line behind and for like kind of pushing on another person's philosophy on the students versus like letting them naturally find out for themselves. And in that journey of finding out for themselves, they may actually disagree with the original person's philosophy. So,
Correct.
do you think the school does a pretty good job of handling that? And if so, how? And if not, what could they do better?
Uh, I think Krishnamurti's philosophy or Krishnamurti's teachings, as it is referred to, as they're referred to, is not something which is easy to grasp. I remember my first year in Sayadri, we used to have some formal spaces where we try to discuss and understand what he's saying, just read a couple of his passages or sections of the books that he has written. And I found myself completely lost. I had no idea what people were talking, and it was quite difficult to grasp. And then COVID happened, 2020, and we were all at home. And I happened to have a couple of his books, and I just browsed through, and it started making sense a bit. So it is not something which is easy to grasp at all. So the natural consequence of that is uh, one may feel as a student, one may feel that a lot of what is happening may not be relevant, or the
Hmm.
philosophy is taken too seriously. But what I've seen is that the same students, when they finish school, go to college, and then come back, and when they share their experiences, I feel that even though an appreciation of the philosophy or an understanding of that philosophy may not necessarily uh, be in alignment with what they feel, but in terms of the day to day or in terms of the practices, there is really a sense of connection that I've seen the
Hmm.
students feel. So, but that is definitely something that I feel that we can work on as to how to make it more accessible, more. I'm not saying that dilute what is being said, but how to find uh, different ways of communicating that. Like, for
Yeah,
example,
he speaks like a philosopher.
yeah, it's not at all easy to understand what he
Yeah.
says. I often, even after 5 years, I find myself lost in many of these discussions, and I feel that right now I'm reading a book on Kabir. Kabir was a singer a few centuries ago, in Varanasi. He was a weaver by profession, and he's very well known in India because a lot of the songs that he wrote have been converted to couplets, which exist in Hindi textbooks in India.
Mm.
So, what he has written is remarkably beautiful, but because it's in the textbook, it becomes something which is forced upon the students, and all the beauty is lost. But anyway, I feel a lot of what Kabir used to talk about is quite similar to what Krishnamurti spoke about. It's just that Krishnamurti spoke in a way which comes off as a lecture or as a speech. Kabir used a different form to perhaps say something very similar, which was in the form of songs or couplets and so
Mm.
on. So, which might be accessible to more people.
I think that's a really interesting point. When I think about it, from the text that I've read about Krishnamurti or his own whatever quote unquote lectures, I think it's the form in which they were even spoken which might lead to that, where it's usually like an interviewer who's like trying to find enlightenment or something, who's talking to him, and then he's like explaining it to that person, as opposed to like him talking to someone he views as like a peer or an equal, where it's like then it's just a discussion. It's not so much like, oh, let me give you this piece of wisdom. It's more like, okay, let's discuss this. Then I think it naturally becomes more digestible because it's not so unidirectional, you know?
Correct, correct. And what Krishnamurti spoke about, I think uh, more and more I see young people trying to engage or understand what he was trying to say. And I feel that a lot of the issues that he spoke about are now perhaps more relevant than they were when he was around.
Yeah.
So competition is something which is definitely seemingly increasing in society. Now it's a little difficult to say, hey, I don't want to be a part of this rat race or this competitive world. I'll go stay in the Himalayas. But if you go on a lighter note, even if you go to the Himalayas, there is competition for tourism happening there. So it's everywhere. One has
Yeah.
to see how one relates to it. How much weightage to give to it. I wouldn't say that I'm part of a school where there is no competition at all. It's there,
Mm.
but it may not be as much as it is usually there.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you one question because from all the schools I've been to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt that the freedoms of the teacher in Sayadri were the highest I've ever seen ever. I mean, they had so much control over what they taught, how they taught, when they taught. There didn't seem to be too strong of a curriculum or like a standard you had to hit. So they just had the freedom to try new things. All the teachers absolutely loved the students, and it wasn't so like, okay, I have to do this. This is my job. But you can tell everyone deeply cared. My question is, and this is more because I also felt the pull. Have you ever thought what life would be like if you perhaps worked there for the rest of your life? Is there something that makes you think that, okay, this is actually the perfect job? I no longer want to leave.
I feel that right now my understanding of how the system works is that very often I've seen people my age change jobs every 2 to 3 years, and it's not as common to stay in one place for 5 years. If I look at myself and if I ask this question, is this a place where I can stay for the rest of my life? I think yes, definitely. But I would say that I'm not sure if I want to do that. I feel that when one is relatively young, it is important to explore different models. Uh, I worked with Teach for India for 2 years, and there is a certain model of education which is followed. Here, it's completely different. It's not even remotely the same. And according to me, it's not even remotely there. Perhaps I may go and see another system which is even more different, perhaps even more radical. So I feel that in order to have a sense of what is possible, one needs to do what you did, something like what you did. You traveled around India, visited different educational centers, spoke to people, stayed, and then that I think gives a lot of perspective, which is important for any work related to education that one wants to do. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reason I asked you that question, I think, is because I went to school, my undergraduate, in a school called UC San Diego, and it's right on the beach. I mean, truly, I felt like I was living a life that I had not yet, quote unquote, deserved. I was just like, I feel like I'm living in a place where people usually retire, where it's like all your basic necessities are more than met. You have the best weather, the best
Mm,
beaches, the best food. I mean, just everything was so good. And sometimes I feel that perfection can be kind of a prison, right? Because when things are perfect, you have to kind of uphold that level. Like you have to be like everything is perfect all the time. Everything is so good. It's really difficult to uphold
yeah,
perfection
yeah,
for over a long period of time. And so
correct,
that's my own kind of insecurity and fear of when I go to places where I'm like, this is so good, I can be here forever. And then I get scared. I'm like, oh no, what if I get caught? What if I just get stuck in here forever? And so
yeah,
something I wanted to ask is it's interesting as people thinking about education because so much of what I think is okay, I want to build, these spaces for kids to learn and love and kind of quote unquote perfect places in many ways for them to like struggle and fail and learn. But there's
correct,
something beautiful about imperfection, right? I mean, when I think about it, for example, my motivation comes from the fact that I went to a very imperfect school. If I had gone to a place where everyone was so understanding, so loving, nurturing, and cared about my learning, I don't know if I would have the same fire and drive that I have today. So
correct,
so perfection is just this really interesting thing because it seems very valuable as you're chasing it, but once you kind of get closer and closer to it, it doesn't seem like what you thought it originally was. So I'm curious what you think about a lot of the students who study in an education system that's far, in many ways, in my definition of what good education looks like, better than the ones that their peers are going to in other
correct,
places around the country. Do you ever
correct.
feel like that sets them up for kind of, being very different, alienated from their peers who went somewhere else, or alienated from the rest of society?
To some extent, I would say yes. That does seem to be the case. I feel that education is something which really has that power to condition one's mind or set a particular uh, pattern of thinking. Uh, for example, like if I look at myself, if I look at myself, when I was a student, I studied in a government school, Kendriya Vidyalaya, which is a group of government schools in India. And I was learning a lot of things in school, but it's only later that I realized I never asked myself, why am I learning this? What's the point? Especially as one reaches ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th grades. Like, what is the point of learning all this? If I show you the textbook for 11th standard biology, which I'm teaching right now, it's this thick. and it's practically impossible to appreciate that much in a matter of say 8 months uh,
Hmm.
for which they can. So if one is taught to question these elements or these aspects throughout school, and after that, if one meets students who have been a part of that system, have perhaps accepted that system, it is something which may not be as uh, easy to transition, and that is something which I have seen in students. But I feel that as long as one has that anchor as to, I feel that this is important, and this is the reason why I feel this is important. I feel that one may not be affected too much by that,
Hmm.
and one can find their circle somewhere.
Because what I'm realizing now about education is that it's very powerful and it can do two
Yeah,
things. It can either, if you haven't developed the social skills, like to the point where you can manage your intellect and fitting in, you can either become alienated, or on
yeah,
the other extreme, if you become really arrogant and egotistical with your ability to convince people using your words, your ability to, then you become kind of this very, you become too powerful without the responsibility. And I'm only realizing this as I get older, where I'm like, your ability to convince people with words is some, and a form of intelligence that is not something that anyone should just have the ability to do, right? Like, I mean, it's
correct,
something that you can really, influence a large number of people, not just one or two, thousands, and if not hundreds of thousands. And so education, I'm realizing, is a very powerful tool that you have to use kind of gently. You have to like know, okay, I'm now gifted this skill, and I have to actually like make sure I make the best use of it. Because I've seen people on both ends, right? I mean, I've met so many academics who don't really fit in, right? Because their
correct,
education has pushed their mind to a point where nobody around them just thinks like them. And then I've also met
correct.
people who like have been educated enough to where they can like flaunt how intelligent they are and make other people around them just feel, not intelligent. So it's just interesting how people choose to wield that sword that they're now given. And so
Correct.
you say, so the theory is that there's not competition, but I can't imagine, young kids not being competitive in that way. How do you think it manifests, which I guess you can still do it to a lesser degree, but how do you think it manifests for kids, perhaps in that like 12th grade or 11th standard, who they must still be competitive in some ways, if not to their peers at
Definitely,
Sayadri, with their peers who go elsewhere, right?
definitely. Like as I said, it's not the case that competition does not exist in a school like ours. It's definitely there. I would say the intensity is much lesser though, in the sense that when one is in, say, 12th grade, one definitely needs to think about what competitive exams you're going to write after that. In India, we have this uh, concept of competitive exams. I'm not sure uh, if how that works in the US. But the most competitive exam at the undergraduate level is the IIT JEE exam. Are you aware of the IIT exam?
Yes, but if you want to explain it for the
I,
listeners, that'd be awesome.
yeah, yeah. So there are these set of institutions in India called the Indian Institutes of Technology, which offer engineering courses for students across the country. And they are like super competitive. Like for one uh, particular seat, I think some 50, 60 students are appearing for that particular exam. So our students also write, some of them, they do write that exam and many other exams or so on. But I would say that when I was in 12th grade or 10th grade, almost the only thing that I did was studying. I think that was the only thing that I was told to do as a student. Everyone was reminding me that I was in 12th standard. Like random uncle and aunties were reminding, hey, you're in 12th standard, you have to study right now. And I would say that is not something which it's taken a bit on a lighter note, in the
Hmm.
sense that just today evening, the 12th standards and I and some other teachers, we were all playing volleyball. Like the board exam starts 10 days from now, 12th of February.
Hmm.
And I don't know how much of this happens in other places. 12th standard is involved with, drama, like they did a theater, a play a few months ago. So those things are there, which keeps them going. Of course, the extent is
Hmm.
reduced. They don't get to do it as much as the 11s or the 9s, but it's not completely stopped. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the most like profound thing anyone can remember when they're going through anything in their life, that there's just also more, right? It's not at most times the kind of the tunnel vision that you'll have. I mean, I always tell my friends this who listen. I was teaching a kid and his mom would come and talk to me, and then she would say, you know, he's going through the 11th grade right now. This is going to be the most stressful time of his life. She said, this is going to be the most stressful time of his life. I was like, are you kidding me? I know this is a student in the US. Like, she was telling me that 11th grade is going to be the most stressful time of his whole life. Like, I mean, it's just to really think that means there's some
Yeah,
disconnection that's happening between what
yeah,
you think life
yeah,
holds for you. You know, it's not easy. There's a lot of stresses and obstacles and things that just come throughout the span of a lifetime. And
correct.
there's no way that schooling is on the top of that list at all. You know, I mean, there's some real life struggles that come people's ways. Like, it's just, it's silly, I think, sometimes when we get laser focused and like, okay, like that happens a lot. So I think it's different. One thing I love about the US is that you can go back to school at any time in your life. And I think that is takes a lot of the stress off, because even, okay, let's say you can go back to do your undergraduate degree, your master's, PhD at 30, 40, 50. So you can switch your path in any time. I know it's a little harder in India to go back to school later in your
Yeah,
life, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so that makes it a bit more stressful, because it's like you have to do it when you're a kid and there's no other time. And I think another part that adds to the stress is in the US, there's more of a holistic application. So you submit essays, recommendations, you submit your grades, your standardized tests, your portfolio. So then they try to look through all of that before making a selection. But in India, it's just your score from those exams. And
yeah.
so there's so much
By and
weightage.
large, yeah, by and large, it's just code from exams. It could be either board exams, which one gives in the 12th standard, or it could be one of those competitive exams that they give after 12th.
So it's really difficult in that one test. There's so much weightage, so you have to. I mean,
Yeah,
I can't imagine the stress that goes through a person's mind when they have to take something like that. That must be a lot of
yeah,
stress.
yeah, yeah.
So
In fact, the IIT exam, a lot of students after 12th, they take a year off, study just for IIT exam, and then take it again. So essentially, meaning that they have spent 3 years of their lives, 11th, 12th, and the extra year after that, studying just for that. So it is something which is, yeah, it is something which they have put so much time into, and the odds are against you, like given the number of people who are writing the exam.
yeah, that must be
So
terribly
yeah,
stressful.
yeah, it is. It is.
So I guess a question that I have then is, the previous person I spoke to, he runs this organization called Project Defy, and his whole they do some amazing work as well. But
Oh,
they're,
yeah, yeah. Where
you
is he
know them?
based?
He's based in Bangalore.
Okay. I think I've heard of this. It rings a bell, but I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, I think I'll
Uh,
connect you
yeah,
to. I think you'd really like some of the work that they do. But his
yeah,
entire philosophy is, so long as people have to get streamlined back into the main system, then no matter what education you do, they eventually have to conform into doing what they need to. So for
Yes.
example, even if a student has all this KF education and thinks differently, if they have to still take the
Yes.
board exam, stress out a lot about it, and then get into schools that value that, then eventually all the
Yeah.
extra stuff that they learned are just not being valued at all. No one's asking, hey,
Yes.
do you know how to play the sitar, and you know how to you know what birds exist on? No one cares. So it's like all the things
Yeah.
that you like developed within yourself is no longer being valued at all. And so the thing is, it seems like for someone who does alternative education, they have to also fully leave the mainstream system
Yeah.
as well. So his whole thing is kind of trying to build something that is fully separate from the mainstream so that you don't ever have to go back into that. Do you think
Correct.
that's a
Correct.
do you think that in itself makes this whole kind of KF philosophy more difficult to deal with? Because imagine if you didn't have to streamline back. You built your own
Yeah.
university, you did KF University, and you were able to do whatever from that. I mean, that I think that would be
Correct.
phenomenal.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, I feel if we are able to do that, running schools itself seems to require so much energy, human power. One has to think if that is something which is possible. But I would say that uh, we do have students in our school who have chosen a different path for themselves. Like just last week, this was 26th January, we had an alumnus of the school who came and he performed a musical instrument. It's called handpan, and it's like a circular percussion instrument.
Those are so cool. It's
Yeah,
black, right?
yeah, yeah. And it's the
Yes.
first time I've seen a live performance of that kind. And he's someone who does that as his profession. And he's now touring across India, Ahmedabad, Rajkot, and so on, Kutch. So uh, I would say that if one has that grounding, of course, one part is that our school has students who are immensely well off financially. So they really don't have to worry so much about money as such. So that, but that does not mean that there is no fear, because a lot of our students fear that they won't be able to uh, maintain the kind of lifestyle
Hmm.
that they've grown up with if they don't get those particular XYZ
Hmm.
jobs. So that element is, of course, there, but that gives a certain leeway, that privilege that is there. It gives more chances. One can afford to, spend a year off, explore, go around, which someone who has to struggle to earn money may not have the chance to. So yeah, I would say that that is something which our system really needs to think, put some focused effort into or thought into. But it's not that it's completely absent now. We do have students who have taken that path, who are,
Hmm.
say, working in NGOs in different countries or in different parts of our own country, and so on.
Because it's interesting, because I think with alternative education as a parent, when you send your kids to it, you have to kind of put your hands up and say this, because they're really being educated, they may choose a path that I am not a fan of at all, right? I mean, they may not want to be an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer. And I feel like KF schools more often than not encourage the type of thinking that would align someone to study something in the humanities, as opposed to maybe something just like where they would want to study literature or history. Like they would fall in love with that more. And so yeah, is that what you see, or do people eventually all end up studying engineering? Or
Definitely not so many engineers, but yeah, I would say it is a good mix of humanities, sciences, or even economics and commerce and so on. But yeah, definitely there is a bent towards humanities. And although at the same time, there is still this perception that science is a safe option. Like,
Mm,
say, if one takes up science in the 11th and 12th, then one can continue to do anything else that they like. You have
mm,
chosen science, you can do humanities, but not the other way around.
mm.
So that perception is still there.
There's so much to talk about, but I guess to for brevity, I'll ask you this. I'll ask you this kind of last question, which
Yeah,
one thing I think is important is working in policy. One of the most important things is when I see really good education, I'm like, how can we make this more accessible? Or how is it that more people can have access to this? So, one of the
yeah,
limitations of the system is, as you said earlier, it is expensive to uphold.
it
And so, a
is.
lot of the
It is.
students who come are upper middle class or upper class in financially. And so, what how can this kind of be extended to a larger group of people?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer this because I have very poor understanding of policy, how it works. But I feel that it is difficult for the government to run a school like this. That is my perception. I may be completely wrong because a school like this or education has to be uh, done by people who are really motivated. And this is something which can happen bottom up and not top down. I feel that if a lot of uh, people who are really concerned or interested in education start their own little centers, uh, and if they could be supported in some way by the society, I'm not sure how that would work. That would perhaps bring this issue of scale. When I say scale, I don't think it is possible to run a school like this with 1,000 students. Our school has some 270, 280 students or so. We need to have perhaps a lot of schools with, say, 100 students and so on, rather than having one really good school where 1,000, 2,000 students are there. And just the other day, I was looking at education, like I was searching for the meaning of the word education. And I tried to see what is the origin of this word. And it was very interesting. As far as I could understand, it was of Latin origin. It came from the word educare or educare. I'm not sure how it is pronounced, but it means to draw out or to bring forth, in the sense that when one is being educated, one is being drawn into it, as opposed to how typically what happens in schools is that student is assumed to be an empty box or an empty container, and you just fill
Mm,
him or her with information rather than eliciting that interest or drawing them towards a particular topic out of interest. So I'm not sure if this is something which the government can really do. It has to be done by a lot of people in different places contextually, because what may
mm.
work here may not work in, say, Ladakh or Sikkim or Arunachal or Pondicherry and so on. So yeah, and I'm now seeing that many parents in different parts of the country, they are taking this upon themselves and they're saying that we are not going to send our kids to these kind of schools which we think are really affecting our children negatively. So they are finding spaces to educate their children or starting some centers where they can educate their children. So yeah, I would like to hear from you about policy in that aspect, given your the time that you have spent
Yeah.
understanding policy.
No, I mean, so this particular theory is an economic theory of education that's talked about in the US as well. If I'm correct, it's called school choice. And that's basically an economic discussion of whether it's better to fund small private schools, like what you're saying, like instead of giving the money to public schools, helping kids who won't be able to go to private schools the vouchers or money so that they can go. And so you're basically,
Correct.
instead of strengthening a large public school system, strengthening these like individual schools all over the place. There's like
Correct.
pros and cons to that, I think, because one con is if you divert the money into doing that, and there'll still be a large number of people who are going to the public school systems who like will
Correct.
still kind of be. The interesting question, I think, which is a whole different conversation where it becomes very utilitarian, is when you're dealing with education on large scales. Because then you're not really thinking, you don't even have, when you're working at that scale, you're not even thinking about individual faces. You're not thinking about any of that. It's just numbers. It's just
Yeah.
1.4 billion
Yeah.
people. That's a number. Okay, how many people are finding employment? How many are unemployed? These are all numbers. They have nothing, which is why I
Correct.
think the thing that you're saying, which is like when you have 100 kids, you know every child. You care
Yeah.
about every child. You want them to all
Yeah.
succeed. So there's that like personal relationship. But as you increase that number, it becomes impossible. And so I think that is one of the hardest problems of policymakers. It's how do you think small but act big? How do you kind of remember who you're working with? You know, I was actually just at my elementary school recently, and I haven't been inside
Mm.
of a school in a long time. And I was like, I've been
Yeah.
working in education for the last 5 years. I've been around academics, research, this and that, but I haven't been inside of a school like in the US.
Yeah.
And it's so crazy that many of these professors have not been inside of an actual classroom in a long time. So it's like, how
Yeah.
is that? So research is very separate from ground
It's
reality, and
divorced. Yeah.
both of
Yeah.
those are even more separate from policy. A
Yeah.
policymaker in education may not have been in a classroom for in decades, right? And so it's that's I think a really important problem of like you even I was talking to administrators. It's like you can't ever just be an admin and a principal and never be inside of a classroom, and you also can't just be a
Correct.
teacher and never work in admin. It's to
Correct.
be the best of what you do, you have to understand all these large systems that are working around you. But that takes time and effort, and it's difficult, right? I mean, you have to understand how policy impacts you, administration impacts you, the philosophy of a culture at the current time that you live in affects you. You have to take the time to understand all these different aspects to then like kind of free yourself of the parts that you don't like and choose a new path. And I think that is the challenging part. I have no idea how
Yeah.
to do it, but there are
Yeah.
theories like suggested where there should never be admin and there should never be teachers. It should always be like an admin teacher combo. So you are maybe
Correct.
teacher 60% of the time and then admin 40%. You should never have like this silo of like, I mean, even Sayadri, admin is just admin, right? I mean, even there, like there's no,
Yeah.
and so there are
Yeah.
theories that shouldn't exist. There are even theories that a student should never be a student. It should always be student teacher, teacher student, where you kind of go in circles and allocate different time and spaces for different kids to become the teacher, right? I think this
Yeah.
concept exists in parenting and everything. I think perhaps as a parent, what you can do is when your kid is really young, make it a 95-5 split. And as they get older and older, make it a 90-10, 80-20. Slowly inch it up until
Yeah.
the teacher is no longer needed. The person who's kind of doing the thing is no longer needed. The
Correct.
conversation we had yesterday that was, I thought, really interesting was a lot of times people who take these type of roles of responsibility have a sense that they want to feel important, right? And I think, let's say you go into teaching because you want to tell yourself, I'm a good person. What ends up happening is you
Mm.
have to act in a certain way so that thought can keep being affirmed. So if you become, let's say, not needed in a classroom, now all of a sudden you no longer will feel like you're a good. So now
Yeah.
your ego, your everything is at stake. So what do you need to do? You
Yeah.
need to make sure that you are needed every day in the classroom. But if you do that,
Yeah.
then I don't believe you're any longer being a good teacher, right? The best teachers eventually make themselves not needed because the kids can learn by
Yeah.
themselves. They have the interest. They have cultivated it for themselves. And so working with this, I think, is also really important of like, are you teaching so you can feel good about yourself? Like if that's the case, then you will always try to teach in a way where you'll always be needed. Like you'll never
Yeah.
fully relinquish. And I think this is the same thing with parenting, right? Like if you
Yeah.
always want to
Totally.
hold on a little bit to that power, then you'll never fully let go and relinquish it to your children to become, who they can. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know how I got here, but I think it made sense. I thought I don't know how I got here from the original question of like, do you fund small schools? But yeah, I think I agree with. I'm so curious to see other countries that may have tried something like this, or other communities that have tried small central schoolings of hundreds. I don't even know. Yeah, even in the US, my high school went from 2000 to 2,800 or something students now. And like, that's a high school. And that's, and so it's just, I'm very curious to see what would happen if you just split that into two schools. Is there a budgeting problem? What is the problem? Same budget. You can even like
Correct.
structure the buildings in such a way, but make it into different schools. Well, I'm curious. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I'll ask some people. I'm curious what that looks like. I mean, because you would think it would be the same budget if you're hiring the same number of teachers. Oh, but you know what would happen? Yeah, I mean, because in Sahyadri, I mean, the teacher to student ratio is really, really low, right? I mean, it's like maybe 10 students per teacher. What is it? Do you know?
It is six students per
Wow. Yeah, I
teacher.
mean,
Yeah.
that's phenomenal. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like a PhD level ratio. Most of these schools are 40 to 1, 35 to
Yeah.
1. It's a lot
Yeah.
more. 6 to 1 is awesome.
Yeah. That's why I think it's best for perhaps policymakers to think about it.
Yeah. But
I'm not sure if I can really answer that question. Yeah.
But it's I think as a person who's in the there itself, I feel like you have a really interesting perspective because you see what that schooling looks like. But
Yeah.
there's so much more to talk about. I'm saying this seriously too, but I would love to have you on again for part 2, because I feel like there's a lot of work we haven't talked about that has to do with the work that you do with the local government schools, all your classes that you take, how you even teach. I'm so curious. We haven't even gotten into how you teach. So maybe we might need an episode. We might need a part 2 of this. But
Totally. Yeah. Even I feel I had a lot of other things in mind as well. And yeah, I would love to continue this conversation further.
Yeah. But thank you so much for sharing everything.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for inviting.
Yeah,
let's have another round of this conversation sometime.
And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.